Okay. This week's Parshat Mishpatim. This is the Parsha right after the giving of the Ten Commandments. And from the very, very general commandments of the Ten Commandments, we enter into the world of details, of pratim. Parshat Mishpatim is among three parshas that have the most mitzvot in the whole Torah. I believe there are 47, I hope I have this right, 47 mitzvot in the parshat of Mishpatim. And it is really one of the most important parshas because so much of Jewish law and so much of the Talmud is based on this parsha. We're going to see in a few minutes that sometimes one or two verses in Parshat Mishpatim turn into whole long sections of the Talmud explaining every detail. So here we're going into the world of the details, but so much of Jewish law is based on this parsha, and so much of world law is based on this parsha. And one of the greatest contributions that we have made to the entire world is the structure of laws and a sense of justice and court system and how courts operate and how decisions are made is really coming very much from this parsha. Now, if you go back to the whole book of Genesis, there's only a handful or even less than a handful of actual mitzvot. It's what we all call the stories of the Torah. And even the book of Exodus up to now is about being in slavery, of coming out of slavery, the 10 plagues, coming to the Red Sea. Things change now. With Parshat Mishpatim, the whole Torah changes gears into mitzvot. That is like, we're quite literally changing gears. It started, with, of course, with the 10 Commandments. And now we're entering into what we'll call the details, into the mitzvot of the Torah. So one of the most important parts of this parsha is the expression, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this is actually, it says, in a wound for a wound, a whole series. And in the Torah, it sounds like if someone wounds someone's hand, and let's say causes their hand to be cut off, then the person's hand should be cut off. Without mentioning anything, I want to be politically correct here, but there are certain places in the world where they actually do cut off people's hands based on this pasuk, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We, of course, have the oral tradition that goes along with the written tradition. And this is a good time to say it, that along with the written Torah, Moshe received the oral Torah. That's what he was doing on Har Sinai for 40 days. And for 40 years, God was teaching Moshe, and then Moshe was teaching the people. But what was he teaching them? The oral tradition as how to understand the written tradition. So the oral tradition on an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is monetary compensation. It doesn't mean it literally. It means that the worth of an eye for an eye, the worth of a tooth for a tooth. And of course, that is the job of the court system, of the judges, is to establish a fair, call it market value for these kind of damages. So the Vilna Gaon had an amazing explanation of how do we know that it's that money, that monetary compensation is what we're talking about here. Because again, the literal words are an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So he says an amazing thing. If we take it in Hebrew, ayin tachat ayin, an eye in place of an eye. But the word tachat also means below. In simple Hebrew, it means something is below something else. So listen to his explanation here. If you take the three letters of ayin for an eye, it's an ayin, yud, nun. That's how you spell eye in Hebrew. Ayin, yud, nun. Now, what he explained was these letters are under the next letters. So in other words, what letter comes after ayin that would make ayin, as it were, underneath it? So the next letter is pei. What is the next letter after yud? Is chaf. And what letter comes after the nun? Is samach. So if you take these three letters, in other words, ayin is under these three letters, and it spells, not in order, but it spells Kessif. Chaf, remember, is above ayin. The samach is above the nun, and the pei is above the ayin. So he says that's how you can see it right in the text. Ayin tachat ayin. The letters that ayin is under spells money, spells Kessif. So I hope we were able to follow this, but it's like an amazing perush that he saw in the actual text where the oral tradition is based. So what I want to talk about tonight is Kessif, money. Why? Is if you go through this whole parsha, and I'm going to read some of it for you, but if you go through the whole portion, what's happening here is there are a lot of damages. There are a lot of ways in which one person is damaging another person or their property. And so much of the parsha is, well, what do you do when someone damages someone else? There has to be fair monetary compensation. So with your permission, I'm just going to read some of them. There are many. If you go through the whole portion, you'll see over and over again the way that we try to find a just solution for when someone damages someone else personally, or their animal, or their property, that it's like done. But what can you do to make it fair? Is you have to give financial compensation. Now, when you think of this, we understand immediately how much of the world's legal system is based on these ideas. Like how many cases go to court over damages? So I'm just reading in English, just some of them, okay? So for anyone who wants to look on right now or look later, it's in Parshat Mishpatim. It's the 21st chapter. And we're going to be reading from the 33rd to the 37th verse. Again, I just picked a few examples. So it says like this: if a man shall uncover a pit. Now this is talking about in a public area. A person needs dirt for their yard. So they go into a public area and they dig earth, but they left a hole. So if a man shall uncover a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall return money to the owner, and the carcass shall be his. Now again, the Talmud goes through tremendous efforts to determine what is a donkey worth, what is a sheep worth, what is a camel worth, what happens if it's a small damage, what happens if the animal dies, and it goes to every possibility we could possibly think of. Okay, I'm continuing. If one man's ox shall strike his fellow's ox, and it dies, they shall sell the living ox and divide its money, and the carcass too shall they divide. Now, this one verse can be 10 pages in the Talmud of discussions and hundreds of commentaries trying to figure out the most fair way to do this. I'm continuing. But if it becomes known that it was an ox that had gored habitually from yesterday and before yesterday, but its owner did not guard it, he shall surely pay an ox in its place, and the carcass shall be his. So again, these are just examples where people do damage to other people, and Kessif, money, becomes the way to try to make it fair. Okay, there's many more examples. I'm just going to jump right now to chapter 22, verses 4 and 5. So these are two other types of examples. If a man permits livestock to devour a field or vineyard, someone has 100 sheep and he doesn't guard them, and he goes into someone's field and eats up all of the grain, eats up all the grapes in the vineyard. Whether he set loose his livestock or he grazed it in another field. In other words, even if he did it by accident, he didn't want it to happen, but it happened, or he did it on purpose. From the best of his field and the best of his vineyard shall he pay. He has to make up for everything that was eaten. The next verse, now this is a little bit different. If a fire shall go forth and find thorns, someone's making a bonfire, making a cookout, and he's careful or he's not careful, and a spark goes into his neighbor's field and burn, and a stack of grain or a standing crop or a field is consumed. The one who kindled the fire shall make restitution. How? Money, Kessif. These are just a few examples. So the Gemara says an amazing thing. But before that, I want to tell you a numerical value. The numerical value of Kessif is 160. Why? Chaf equals 20, Samach equals 60, and Pei equals 80. 80 and 60 and 20 equals 160, equals the word Selim, image. This is the same word that's used that God created man in his image, in the image of God. So what can we learn from this? something very, very, very important. The way we relate to money is an image, a mirror of who we are. If someone cheats in business, it's a mirror image of their personality traits. If someone is very generous with their money, it's an expression, it's an image of who they are. So taking that, the Gemara says, you can tell who a person is through three things. And what's interesting is all three of them, it's a play on words, are the first two letters of Kessif. Okay, so they say you could tell a person through their kos, through their kis, and through their kaas. All three of these words have the first two letters of Kessif. What does this mean? Kos. Kos means a cup. The way a person handles their liquor tells you a lot about a person. You know what I mean? I'm sure people know for themselves or for other people that when people have a little or have too much, all of a sudden you can tell a lot about a person, the way that they drink. The next word, and again, all of these are based on these two letters, the first two letters of Kessif. The next one is kis, pocket. The way a person deals with their money tells you what kind of a person they are. In other words, if a person is generous with their money with other people, it's not just that they're generous with their money. It's an expression of who this person is. This person has empathy for other people. This person cares about other people. This person wants to help other people. So it's not just, okay, I gave some money to charity. It's an image of who this person is. And the third one is Kaz. Kaz means anger. The way a person is either angry or is able to hold back their anger. Like something happens that is not very nice. One person does something not very nice to another person. Well, the receiving person can take it with a grain of salt. They could let it slide off their back. They could answer nicely but firmly. They could get furious, or, God forbid, they could kill the other person. In other words, the way we deal with anger tells a lot about the person. So this is a very, it's all a play on words. If you follow it, remember Kessif, the first letters is Chaf, Samech, and these three terms, Kos, Kis, and Kas, are all based on these two letters. So the middle one is money, our kis, our pocket. So we have three examples in the Torah. When Avraham, when his nephew was taken captive in a war, what was called the War of the 4 Kings versus the 5 Kings. So Avram goes and he saves his nephew and all the people of Sodom. When he comes back, this is in Parshat Lech Lecha. When he comes back, at that time, Yerushalayim was called Shalem, and it says that he was called the high priest of Shalem, whose name was Malki Tzedek. He was from Noach. He was, according to tradition, he was Shem. He was the son of Noach. And he comes out and he greets Abraham and he blesses him. And it says that Abraham gave him a tenth of his wealth because he was considered the Kohen. He gave him a tenth of his wealth. Later, when Jacob has the dream of the ladder, and God appears to him and promises to protect him, and that his children will be blessed, and the whole world will be blessed through him. So afterwards, it says Yaakov made a vow, and he says, God, if you will protect me and clothe me and give me what to eat. Because at that point, according to tradition, he didn't have a penny to his name. He was quite literally penniless. He had the shirt on his back. And then he said, if you do all of this, I'll really know that your promises will all come true. And I promise to give a tenth of my wealth, meaning to the poor, to those who need it. Later in Parshat Re'eh, in the book of Deuteronomy, then it becomes a mitzvah. Up to now, Avram is promising a tenth, tithing, in Hebrew, ma'aser. Then Yaakov repeats it. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, it makes it a mitzvah to this day. To this day, we have a mitzvah to give a tenth of our wealth to charity. So giving charity in the Jewish tradition is not optional. It's not like I can decide who I want to give it to, but the truth is there are many, many Jewish laws also, the hierarchy of who you should give your meiser to, your tithing to. But just in general, the idea is that we recognize that whatever wealth that we have, yes, I put in the work, but it's God's blessing. And that's how I acknowledge it, because God wants me to share the wealth. It's a bigger subject, but the Torah in many, many different mitzvot sets up what we would call today a welfare system. In other words, no one is supposed to fall through the cracks. And because we don't really have the time and we can't go into the details, but if you go through the Torah makes sure that the widow and the orphan and the poor, everyone has ways in which they will not fall through the cracks. It's an obligation on an individual and a community that there should be no one in the community that lacks the basics. Doesn't mean it's not, let's say, socialism or communism in a way that everyone has to have equal. But it does mean that we cannot allow anyone to lack the basics of a honorable existence. So we'll put it that way. So sharing our Kessif, our wealth, is an obligation. It's a beautiful obligation, but it's not like if I feel like it, I will, and if I don't feel like it, I won't. No, we're told it's an obligation, not only on the individual, but on the community as well. On a community as well. And there's charity with money, but there's charity with time. Someone needs a favor, visiting the sick, helping a bride, all kinds of ways. And I'm sure you all know this, that any place in the world that there's some kind of a natural tragedy, whether it's a hurricane or an earthquake, Israel traditionally are the first people to arrive. In Israel, there's a whole unit in the army that is prepared at a moment's notice with huge movable tents and medical equipment and you name it, ready to jump on the first plane and to go wherever help is needed. This is something we could be very, very proud of. Could be very, very proud of. And even when it happens to our people who don't even have relations with us, Israel always offers at least to come to their aid. So I want to give another numerical value here, is that I'm going back to Jacob. When Jacob has the dream of the ladder. So this is a Torah from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says that the numerical value for ladder in Hebrew, sulam, equals 136. He said another word for money also equals 136, not Kessif, but mammon. Mammon is a different word for money in Hebrew. And it could even be that the word money comes from the word mammon in Hebrew. You know that there are many, there's actually a book that, I don't remember the title, but it's something like 1,000 common words in English that come from Hebrew. And, I didn't think of it before. It just came to me that probably money comes from mammon. So mammon is the same numerical value as ladder. So the Baal Shem Tov said, money is like a ladder. It can bring you to the highest peak and it can drive you down to the lowest depths. Meaning, and I think we all know from how society works, that what lows people are willing to go to amass wealth. People kill for it, people steal for it, people rip people off in business. People will do the worst things to amass wealth. On the other hand, what tremendous good money can do. What tremendous mitzvot, tremendous healing can happen. So many situations can be rectified through money. So that's just a beautiful idea of thinking of the way money works is like a ladder. You can go up the ladder, or you could go all the ways to the bottom, all the ways to the bottom. But there's no doubt that money is a tremendous challenge for people. Making a living, paying the bills, supporting a family, helping a community. These are very challenging situations. And actually, it says in the Gemara, it says there are two things that are as hard as splitting the Red Sea. One is to make a proper match between a man and a woman. It's as hard as splitting the Red Sea. And making a living is as hard as splitting the Red Sea. I'm sure all of us at different times in our life have had that experience of really feeling pressed about our financial situation. But here's where our original idea of Kessif being an image comes in, because many people, when challenged, will maintain a moral and ethical compass and will not do anything that is contrary to fair business practices in order to alleviate their own financial obstacles. Other people will, like we said, will go to the opposite and will do anything they can to get what they can. It just reminds me, I'm being very spontaneous here. I think it was last week where I quoted a number of verses from songs. So this just popped in my mind. It's an amazing verse, again from a song from Bob Dylan. Trying to think of the name of it. I can't remember the name of the song, but he says, from Broadway to the Milky Way is a long way indeed, and a man will do what he's got to do when he's got a hungry mouth to feed. I'll say that again, because he's touching on something very deep here. From Broadway to the Milky Way is a long distance indeed, and a man will do what he's got to do if he's got a hungry mouth to feed. Now, this could go either way. A man will do what he's got to do means if I have to take on a second job, if I have to work overtime, if I have to sell something important to me in order to feed that hungry mouth, then I'll do it. Or someone will say, a man will do what he's got to do. If I got to steal, I'll steal. If I have to kill, I'll kill. So it's like the sulam. It can go either way. So just to bring this all together, and then we'll do it like we always do. We'll open up the mutes, and anyone can ask or comment or share. But this parsha begins really a whole new phase of the Torah. And as I said before, anyone who has my book, Orchard of Delights, I believe this is the first Torah in the parsha, the tremendous influence the ideas in this parsha have had on the world. Enormous. If you go through this parsha, you can see so much about modern society and how it works, and at least the way a just legal system should work. We all know that it doesn't always work like that, but at least these are the ideals. And as I said, so much of the oral tradition is based on this parsha. So I just want to end with a blessing. Excuse me. That, first of all, like we said before, the way we drink, the way we put our hand in our pocket, and the way we deal with anger is the image of who we are. So we should remember this Torah. Remember this Torah is that we want our money to reflect our highest ideals. We want, if we want to drink a l'chaim, we want it to be in holiness and not as an excuse to get drunk. And when we're put in a situation which is enough to make us angry, by not getting angry, that tells a lot about who we really are. So we should all be blessed. First of all, we should have parnasa b'revach. We should all have livelihood without having to be challenged. It's like splitting the Red Sea. Not so simple, but we should all be blessed. We crossed the Red Sea. We did it. So we should all be blessed to be able to pay the bill, especially now. In all seriousness, the many people in the world are really, really challenged because of the pandemic and because of so many things. Just today in Israel, we're coming out of our third shutdown. And I don't know if you remember what I looked like last week. My hair had not been so long in years, but barbershops were not allowed to open. And so today I went and got a haircut. You can tell. So I asked him, how long have you been closed? 7 weeks. 7 weeks. Now, this is a person who has a family. But this is happening all over the world. That it's a challenging time. So whoever is challenged, we should be able to get through this by keeping our moral and ethical compass with us. And we should get over this pandemic already. And we should have everything good. Everything good.